Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov. It's great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. During today's discussion, we'll learn how to pinpoint and prioritize impactful use cases to ensure your CDP adds value to your strategy, to your data strategy. Now, let's meet our guests that we have with us today. First is David Raab, founder and CEO of the CDP Institute, joining us today from Connecticut. David, great to have you with us.
Hi, Marissa. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Also, we have Robin Clayton, Managing Director for the US at 55, who's here with us in New York. Robin, hello.
Hi, Marissa. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And finally, David Schey, Senior Vice President of Data Cloud and Head of Data Intelligence at Zeta Global, who's also in New York. Hey, David.
Hey, Marissa. Great to be here.
So happy to have all of you with us today, and we're so happy to have you and our audience with us. Just as a reminder, today's guests will be sticking around for a live Q&A in the second part of the show. So just to remind you, keep it conversational with us. We love to hear from you. Use the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen to tell us where you're coming from and also to submit your questions. We will do our best to get to as many of those live questions as we can during the Q&A, so please keep them coming. We have some great content planned for you today, so let's get started. David, over to you.
Okay, thank you again, Marissa. We'll jump right in with the initial question that people need to answer, which is like, what the heck is this use case thing anyhow? Now, I would imagine most of you have suffered through use case creation in the past, so this may be more of a review step, but everybody approaches use cases just a bit differently. So we'll talk about the way that we think about use cases and the structure that we use to analyze them. But so a use case, what is this? A use case is a set of resources and steps to complete a task. That's really the critical thing. It's this sort of recipe, like in a cookbook that says, this is what you do, then that's what you do. That's what you do. When you start off with these ingredients, you end up with something accomplished, like, messages out to retargeting or whatever it's going to do. So when you design a use case, when you document a use case, you have a number of components. There's some high-level components, which is what's on this slide. So we have the result of the goal. What am I trying to achieve? What's the task I'm trying to do? And then you say, well, what's my problem? And then how am I going to solve that problem? What's my challenge and what my solution? So here we have an example that talks about a particular use case of triggering cross-channel journeys based on e-commerce behavior. And again, we have the result, which is deliver consistent journeys. We have the challenge, which is journeys are not consistent. And then how do we solve it? So we're going to have marketers discontinuing irrelevant journeys by streaming e-commerce behaviors into the CDP, which will decide whether to start a new journey or continue the customer's current journey. And the CDP is going to coordinate the action. So it's a fairly detailed solution statement. That's the first thing you kind of have to realize is you got to know what you're doing in advance. You got to really understand what the process is, what the steps are to complete the task before you can write down the use case. So you start with this relatively general solution statement, which still kind of lays everything out. And then you go to a second part of the use case, which is much more detailed. And these are the specific steps: ingest the data, deploy the program, select the best channel under action here in the second column to the left on this thing. And then we go into, okay, who's going to do it? Who are the agents? What are the systems that are involved? What are the data that are involved? What are the processes that are involved? And if you actually do a proper thing, you look at what are the skills the users need, what are the gaps in each step that are needed to be filled. So you can get quite a detailed statement of what it is that really is required to execute this use case. So much for, okay, that's what a use case is, right? Hopefully that, again, all makes sense to you. And you've probably seen different versions of this. Again, company kind of has a standard format. If you don't, this version is as good as any, if you will. And so the second question is, what do we do with these use cases? And they actually have several different purposes or different reasons. The first thing you're probably going to build out use cases for is just to build your business case before you can start the project. How am I going to justify this investment, which is substantial, in a CDP, if it's a CDP use case? And then I'm going to use my use cases to define the requirements. We just went through all those different steps that you need to execute, the actions that you need to take, and the requirements. And those lay out very quickly to the actual system requirements or functional requirements. And the third set of uses we have for the use case is the actual deployment plan. And how am I going to execute my project once I begin to run it out and deploy it? And that's the sequence primarily of the use cases. Those are all different applications. You actually all use slightly different kinds of use cases for that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But again, just taking a step back, why are we bothering? Because it is a lot of work. First thing we need is accurate requirements. You can't do anything without accurate requirements. And use cases are really the only place that you're going to develop accurate requirements. Anything else, like looking at other people's use cases and talking to analysts and consultants and stuff, or even other people who've done other projects, their use cases are their use cases. They're not your use cases. And if they're not your use cases, you're not going to get your requirements. And the second important reason, a little more meta, if you will, is that the use cases are a way to engage the users, the actual people who use the system in the process. They have to be the ones who are going to tell you what use cases are going to be useful to them, because they're the ones who are going to execute it. And if you don't come up with use cases they're not going to be real enthused about executing it. And even if you are coming up kind of by chance with the right use cases, but they're not engaged, they're not even going to understand where these use cases come from. So you really need to keep your users engaged at every step of the way in order to have a successful project. So let me stop here. I'm sure that David and Robin have many deep thoughts as well. So you guys have any additional comments on this?
David, I think you covered it really well. I guess if I had to pick a few things when it comes to use case basics, at the end of the day, making sure you're defining really, really clear, ambitious goals up front. So what is the art of the possible, and what are the things that if you're a marketer and you're putting yourself in their shoes and all your team's shoes, like what do they want to be able to do tomorrow that they cannot do today? And on the back of that, defining how you're going to measure that and what kinds of KPIs. So it can be really obvious, like campaign uplift and ROI, but it can also be other things. Like instead of taking 5 days to generate this list and and like transform all this data, you can be like, okay, I'm going from 5 days to 5 minutes to create this. So there's so much to think through when you're thinking about what the tangible impact is and how you report that back up to your leadership and your sponsors. And that's really, really important as early as identifying the use case goals, because that way you can gain buy-in early from the top down, and then you help carry your successful implementation through. So successful use case implementation or CDP implementation starts on day one with looking at use cases that are applicable to you and your teams.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what Robin said, really like the word art of the possible. I think that's a really critical piece of this. Really exploring all the possibilities and ensuring that you're laying everything out on the table so that you can help identify the best use cases, both for the short term, but also long term as you're developing that roadmap.
Right, absolutely. Okay, and that leads us very nicely into the question, well, what are the right use cases? How do we pick the right use cases? And Robin, you actually hit the nail on the head by saying that CDP use cases are use cases that the CDP makes possible. What can't you do today that the CDP is going to let you do? Because there's a million things you can do with the CDP. And sometimes it's just a matter of doing existing things better, but it's usually a matter of something that I can't do at all. That's kind of what the business users are going to come up with, because that's what makes them excited. So, wow, now I can do this cool new thing that I couldn't do before. Not that they don't want to save money by doing things more efficiently, but it's really like, wow, I have this capability. So typically a CDP use case is going to involve sharing data, because CDP is unified data. That's what they do, is they build these unified customer profiles that typically companies without a CDP are not going to have. So that's the core thing, that if you look at the long lists of CDP use cases, usually that's the thing that they can't do today, is share data. But there may be other things that you can't do today that a CDP will enable you to do. Maybe capturing new data types, dealing with unstructured data, which we have a lot of that now, right? All kinds of text that comes in, with comments and call center notes and chat logs and things like that. Then most systems don't do a very good job with the CDP. It's able to capture that data and then bring in the tools to actually convert that data typically into something a little more structured that can be analyzed. Data stored longer and more detailed than what you do. A lot of like data warehouses, for example, summarize data. Okay, that's great for what a data warehouse is built for. It's not necessarily good for what marketers want to do. So keep that detail or keep it longer. Identity resolution, again, a common gap in many companies. So recognizing that this person in social is really this person on the web, is really this person in email, and having an identity graph that pulls all that together, which is what you need, of course, to build those unified profiles. And then real-time event triggers or real-time access to the profile to say, call it up and put it on a call center agent screen. Those are all things that are pretty common gaps that a CDP can, or at least one would hope, will allow you to fill. And frankly, if the CDP doesn't allow you to fill those gaps, you got the wrong CDP. So they're based on actual business needs. We said that before, but honestly, we can't say it enough. They're defined by business users. Just so important. Let the users tell you what it is they want to do. Don't tell the users what you think they should do, because you may not be right. And even if you are right, if the users don't want to do it, well, you could debate with them that they're wrong, but probably course of least resistance, and just ask them what they need. Often, the second bullet point here, often the CDP is sponsored by a particular department. Could be the advertising people or the email people or the web people or the data team. And again, they have stuff that they want and they are business users, but there are probably other departments that could also use the CDP and will eventually want to use the CDP. So make sure that you're going to pull in their input as well so you can support them all. Broad range of application, not just the simplest. We'll talk about that a little more in 1 second. And because you're talking to business users, they kind of want to make money. That's their job, right? They want to execute new cool promotions or have new capabilities in their department, whatever department is. So they talk about activation use cases. But there are also these foundational use cases, things like identity resolution. Very few business users wake up and say, damn, I need better in identity resolution. What can I do to do that? They say, yeah, I want to combine these two kinds of data, which implies identity resolution. But things like identity resolution, which I've just picked more or less out of the air, is something that actually supports a great number of use cases. It's a foundational thing. You can't build the profiles without identity resolution. So even though the users might not come up and list identity resolution as a use case on its own, it actually is an important foundational use case. So look at those things. Look at the profiles about ingesting new data types, about, again, building the profiles out, about calculating certain kinds of aggregates or model scores or whatever. Those are not necessarily going to come up directly in your discussions with the business users, but they're important to support what the business users want to do. And because they're going to apply to multiple use cases, you kind of want to analyze them separately as their own class of use case. So again, this is picking the right use cases. And we talked earlier, well, there's different kinds of use cases, and actually, or there's different kinds of uses for use cases. And each of these actually requires a slightly different set of use cases to support. So when I'm developing system requirements, I really want to kind of ask for the tough cases. What are the things that are high complexity use cases that I might not do always, but I want to make sure my CDP can do it? And the value of the use case, a little less important. Obviously, you don't want to engineer for use cases that are worthless. But even if it's a relatively obscure, relatively small use case that doesn't have a ton of value, if you know you're going to want to use it for whatever reason, important to have that in there. Whereas my deployment use cases, what's the sequence that I'm going to do these in? I have to look at the incremental complexity because I'm going to deploy incrementally. I'll do the simple ones first, and then I'll do the more complicated one that are build on the simple ones, and the more complicated ones that build on those. And their value really matters. I want each of my incremental use cases, every use case I add should have substantial value. And then when I'm building my use cases, my business case, of course, at the start of the project, even though I've listed this last, that is kind of the opposite extreme. I definitely care about value because I have to have enough value to justify the investment. But I don't need the most complex use cases. Actually, I want the simplest use cases that'll deploy and deliver the value that I need to justify the project. So whether this little matrix here makes me good or not, I'm a consultant by trade. I have to have a matrix. Different places to look at for all the different kinds of use cases that you're going to do. Ideally, of course, at least in your initial discussions, you kind of discuss them all, identify them all, and then you decide which ones to build out, depending on which stage you are in the process. Financial analysis of just that business case notion, which just go into a little more deeply. This is a summary of the Forrester total economic impact analyses or across 8 different vendors. We just put them all together just to get obviously revenue is primarily the thing that you look for. And in this case, they were looking about a 3.5x revenue gain versus the cost. But there are other values as well, staff savings, technology savings, reduced tech costs for some of the systems you might be able to discontinue or use more efficiently. And then, of course, media savings as well, if you're going to advertise more efficiently. And those by themselves might not justify the full investment, but if you add all those three together, again, it comes up to, I can't do the math in my head, but whatever it is, roughly 2x looks like gain over the investment. So this is just averages. Your mileage will vary, but these are the kinds of categories of analysis that you might want to do to make sure that you understand sort of where you're going and where you might get some value out of your use cases and which use cases to analyze. Again, let me stop here and get some input from the other experts here.
Hey, thanks, David. And I love that you brought up the financial analysis and business case, because that's becoming increasingly important, as regardless of whoever the stakeholder is, they need to justify the investment that's being made. And I think the great part about it is they are fairly predictable. That we've had enough history and being able to see the incrementality that's provided across the different use cases, and now we can develop projections off of that and perform around the use cases to be able to have justified that investment. And then one other piece I just want to double click into is that for that business case, the discovery process becomes critical. Because that's how you're able to understand all the assumptions that go into the business case. That's how you're able to understand and make it very relevant, tying back to that specific brand. And two things we found helpful during that discovery process is, one, having an organized discovery document that captures all that relevant information up front. And then two, and especially in more complex cases, actually holding it as a workshop. Be able to have an in-person workshop, get all the stakeholders together, understand and prioritize the different use cases, get all the inputs, get all the discovery questions in a more collaborative environment.
Build on that. I love that you just brought that up, because as you're going through that discovery process and you're thinking through what use cases am I prioritizing for today, tomorrow, and in the future, it's really important to work with someone who's either done it before in your network or a vendor, a partner you trust, because you want to make sure that you're also thinking about the further down the road use cases and the requirements that they might generate, so that when you're designing the CDP and the implementation itself, you're taking from those discovery documents and you're ensuring that you're designing it in a way that you can use and evolve the CDP so that it meets your needs over time as you think about your maturity curve and your use case roadmap. So you're setting a foundation to almost future-proof your roadmap of use cases, if you will. Super important. Great point, David.
It's almost like you guys looked at my slides in advance, because the next section is going to talk about workshops, which David just brought up, and experienced workshop leaders or analysts, which Robin just brought up. So maybe we'll just zip right through this section because you've already covered it. All right. So again, there is a preliminary step, which is the analyst going through and talking to the business users. But because we want to get those users engaged, the workshops are just so central to the process of developing the use cases. And really, there's more than one workshop. There's multiple workshops that you're going to do, but there are some things that are kind of common. First of all, I got to invite the right people. Remember, we talked about earlier, not just having one department involved, but all the departments involved for potential users. So get them all in that workshop room and lock the door. Introduce them to each other, because they might not even know each other if it's a big company. The first thing you want to do in at least the initial workshop is just educate the user. They may not all be familiar with CDPs. Some of them will be. Some will be maybe even they've dealt with CDPs before. Others will not. So make sure everybody's kind of on the same level of understanding of what we're going to do. Then you want to build that problem list. What are the problems they want to solve? And this, again, is where an experienced leader comes in, because he was, what about this? What about that? What about the other thing? Oh, yeah, now that you mention it. Okay, it might not be top of mind for the business users, but you do want to make sure you flesh out a fairly complete set. Identify which of the problems can be solved by a CDP. CDP does not solve everything. It's not a magic bullet. And then select the right use cases for your purpose. And we talked about some use cases are relevant for business case. Some use cases are relevant for deployment. Some are relevant for requirements. So understand what you're trying to achieve in this workshop, which use cases you want to focus on in this workshop. Again, knowledgeable leader. Thank you very much, Robin. Adequate time. These are workshops take a long time to sort of get everybody warmed up. So don't hour long. It's just not enough. Offsite if at all possible. Certainly several hours either way. Make sure the participants are going to see the value. Why are we doing this? What's in it for me? Make sure you have adequate detail or have your analysts follow up. And then really important and something people kind of tend again to sort of slip over is what are the non-CDP obstacles? Do I have the data? Do I have the compliance capabilities? What are my other systems like? Am I going to have to make a lot of business process change? People are reluctant to make change. So that's change management super important here in success. How much cooperation am I going to have for use cases that span departments? These are all important obstacles. They're not technical. But in fact, most of our research shows actually very clearly that where people run into problems, it's not the technical issues with the CDP. It's not understanding their requirements. It's not getting that user engagement. And user engagement is essential for getting good requirements. So make sure you think about some of these other things as well. And okay, so Robin and David, any more thoughts on that? Oh, wait, there's more. Engaging the users, post-workshop. Workshop's just one step in the process. Review the completed cases, involve the users in the vendor selection. They don't go away after the workshops. Again, they do have important input. I'm not going to say their input isn't important during the vendor selection, but it's also just a matter of keeping them engaged so they don't just wake up one morning and somebody comes and say, hey, we've selected product X. And like, well, why the heck did you select that one, right? So make sure that they're involved in the whole way so they understand and support the decisions that you made after deployment or during deployment. Training, super important, something that unfortunately people tend to skimp on. Center of Excellence is a really good idea, again, to support the users during the deployment. We feel deployment one department at a time simplifies your training. So make sure that one department kind of does several use cases and sort of gets acclimated and gets used to and excited about the CDP before you go on and involve some other department. And to Robin's earlier point about measuring and publicizing the results. Again, you want to build some enthusiasm for this use case thing, for the CDP thing. And again, let me see if you can predict my next slides, you guys.
I think that your point about enthusiasm is key, because at the end of the day, what you really want in the upfront discovery section when you're starting to do the use case workshops is to create like an advocacy group within your organization who's excited about the CDP and is going to take ownership to help see this through and make it take life in the company. If you can do that, you're going to be successful. You can do anything you want, you can bring the right technology, but if you're not bringing the people side of the equation with you, it's an uphill battle. So I think getting that right first is really, really important. So I love that you brought that up. So starting with the art of the possible and getting everyone excited about what that North Star is and what they're going to be able to do. And then the second thing, maybe it's one of the more basic foundational pieces, but I, for some reason, think it gets skipped, is having a really strong and comprehensive RACI. I mean, basic project management 101, but it goes a really long way when you're kicking off a CDP implementation, especially because, to your point, David, there's so many outside of just the platform itself. It touches, at a system standpoint, so many pieces of your ecosystem, both upstream and downstream. So many opportunities for new internal governance processes in ways where your team maybe hasn't collaborated before, to your point, that if you don't identify upfront, you're gonna find out along the way, and it'll be much less painful if you control the narrative and you get everyone excited and you iron those pieces out from day one.
Great.
Absolutely. And just one other thing I want to add, and I think this becomes important as you're talking about use cases, is to make sure they're future-proof. Because I think a lot of times people get bogged down in the immediate use cases. And the CDP is such a big investment, and on many levels, that you want to make sure that 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you have the appropriate use cases that are mapped out. And this is Robin in a call out the term you keep on using, which I love, art of the possible, right? And that's where you can absolutely start to identify those things. Even if you're not ready for the use cases right now, think about where you want to be in a couple years and make sure you start to think about those use cases and start to lay out how you prioritize those against the roadmap.
Absolutely. And Marissa's being very calm, but I know we're actually 5 minutes ahead of where we're behind where we should be. So Marissa, I appreciate your I will not play poker with you.
But
very quick.
It was a great conversation. So keep going.
All right. So very
summary.
Quick summary. Again, use cases define requirements. Business users are key to the use case sourcing, and continuously engage those business users for project success. So now I will turn it back over to you, Marissa.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David. That was great content. And thanks as well to you, Robin and David, for your additional insights. So let's now shift gears and talk about some of those key use cases. David Schey, I'll pass it to you.
All right, thank you. So as David was talking about earlier, it's really important to tailor the CDP use cases to the individual stakeholders through whether it's that discovery process, through the workshops, et cetera, and make sure that it's really aligned to the overarching KPIs and performance metrics that are really important. However, part of what we do at Zeta, and especially in my role, is we like to keep track of use case performance benchmarks, really to get a sense of overall what typically has a bigger impact on customer experience, revenue, whatever those KPIs are. So for to generalize potential use cases more broadly, I like to dimensionalize it by effort versus impact, which is very similar to what David had laid out before. And that's really what a CDP can deliver with the least amount of resources while impacting the greatest incremental lift to the business. So I want to highlight some unique benefits to a more comprehensive CDP. And David mentioned before around identity, but also calling out things like real-time data enrichment, AI-driven intelligence, that in particular unlock what we consider to be more forward-thinking, art of the possible, use cases that are leveraging these capabilities. So based on that criteria, we want to really focus on these four use cases here. So the first around targeting first-party audiences and paid channels, and that's really to leverage the identity resolution and media engagement and intent signals to orchestrate owned and paid channels across the entire customer journey. For real-time in-market triggers, it's focusing on first-party and real-time third-party signals, such as competitor stored visits or transactions or even life stage events. When we're talking about customer personalization for next best product, price sensitivity, offer management, purchase channel preference, and more. And then finally, for number four, getting better attribution, but being able to do that in a deterministic manner. So deterministic omnichannel measurement and attribution so that you can effectively understand what is contributing to performance and how to allocate those resources accordingly.
All right. Well, these are going to be some great use case examples. So David, let's kick it off with the first one, targeting first-party audiences in paid channels.
To start off with this use case, we really want to focus on some of those capabilities I talked about before that leverage some of these unique CDP capabilities. So things like identity resolution, omnichannel orchestration, single view of a customer, and more. So that's why this, I believe, is a priority use case. As a marketer, you really only have what I like to refer to as a handful of levers to pull. You can identify what the right audience to target with the right message, the right offer, the right channel, the cadence or order of messaging, and at the right frequency and the right time. So, for example, let's say you have a customer that comes lapsed, and let's say they're lapsed in email in particular. That may just be their way of telling you that you're just not contacting them in the right channel. Or potentially, let's say they need more reinforcement of messaging or repetition of benefits so that the brand is top of mind when they need it. And the CDP is a really great way of testing this out and segmenting customers by what marketing, what I'll call like levers, are most important to customers, and then delivering on that experience. So in this example over here, if we look at the storyboard, let's say you have a customer, Mary, and Mary's the best customer because she spent a lot with the brand in the past. However, she hasn't engaged with email or made a purchase recently, so she's showing signs of churning. We can then leverage all the signals that we're collecting that I talked about before on Mary, both within and outside the brand, and use that to understand if there's just a different channel she's starting to engage with. And to be even more relevant, we can see if there are any signals that indicate she is in market to buy right now. And you can see here some of these signals can be first party signals where you look at historical behavior to say, when is she going to be likely to replenish or repurchase? We can also use third party signals as well to understand, let's say she's researching a category, visiting a competitor. And then through this analysis, we can identify if Mary is becoming increasingly engaged with other channels. And in this case, we're saying CTV and search. And then trigger testing her messaging in these different channels and see if we contact her at the right time and in the right channel. We'll be able to get Mary to actually repurchase and eliminate that churn. And the great part about this is we can test out this hypothesis for Mary and others like her to see if this drives an incremental lift in that re-engagement rate and conversion rate. And this is just one example, but the concept can really be applied to all of the use cases where we can leverage those first-party audiences and behaviors really across the entire customer lifecycle to understand how much that this channel timing, cadence, and other levers can have on performance. And then finally, in addition, this really allows marketers to be more precise with their media spend to ensure it's allocated to where it can generate the greatest impact. So there could potentially even be a cost savings on the media side by being able to orchestrate both paid and owned channels all in one place.
All right. Thank you, David. That was, I think, a really interesting visual you have there about how to re-engage Mary. So thank you for sharing that use case with us. Robin, the next use case you will lead, actually. Tell us a little bit more about the real-time in-market triggers.
Would love to. One reason I really like real-time and in-market triggers as a concept is because it really puts the consumer first, and it really is impactful to the experience that your consumers is having. So like David just mentioned, right place, right message, right time. The right time is what's key. So, I mean, whoever they is, says timing is everything in life, whether personally, professionally. Well, guess what? It's also timing is everything when you're talking about engaging with your consumers and marketing as a whole. So really no different there. So having access to real-time or near real-time data is incredibly important. And that's really what enables you to connect with the end consumer on a much deeper level and really capture the moment that matters in the life cycle or their consumer journey as they move from one phase to the next. So super important. Quick definition, I think it's pretty obvious, but a trigger is an event or an action that you define that results in an automated outcome. Maybe a campaign message as predefined by you, maybe it's a push notification, maybe it's an email. It could be omni-channel, it could be triggered by quite a few things. But at the end of the day, the trigger has to resonate with the user. So it goes back to that human experience and understanding that journey and the life cycle and where they are. So I think triggers themselves are pretty straightforward, but getting them right can be a little more challenging. You can layer on more complicated things as well when you start talking about inventory data. If something's, low inventory, almost out of stock, or it could be out of stock. So you start thinking about real-time messaging. If a consumer or a target list meets certain conditions, pushing out real-time messaging communication for them. So it can get pretty exciting and really help you move the needle in an impactful way. There are some more complicated real-time trigger examples like life cycle or life stage changes, competitive visits, to David Schey's point earlier. But then there are some ones that you have more control over, like on your own digital or physical properties that are pretty easy to get up and running. So I don't know, abandoned shopping cart or cross-sell, upsell, all those types of things. There's also real-time location-based personalization. So if there's a weather event happening or someone's geo, et cetera, you can really provide like tailored messaging and try to push for a certain action or outcome that you're looking for. So I think from a real-time standpoint, it really helps you start building what you could do in personalization for a while, taking it to the next level. Something I will say when you think about real-time triggers, one, obviously moments in the journey that matter are key. So contextualizing timing is important. Being able to target your consumers with one-to-one campaigns with messages for them, awesome. And then something I think that people skip over sometimes is qualifying expectations, probably as part of that upfront use case discovery that both the Davids alluded to earlier. But when you're talking about real-time or near real-time, you need to make sure on your race that you have the right stakeholders to talk about how to make that happen. Because oftentimes you need to make sure you have the right level of technical investment and processes in place in order to enable those use cases. So making sure you include those people up front to enable the real-time triggering is pretty key when you talk about those types of use cases. But yeah, I think we talk about personalization next, so I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Robin. Those were some really good examples of real-time triggers. So thanks for sharing those with us. David, how about some examples of customer experience in action?
Right. And so customer level personalization is a very broad topic. Almost every CDP application actually is going to involve that, or at least a lot of them will. But, so when you do a personalization use case, you really need to look at the specific application, not just, we're going to have a more personalized experience for my customer. So we've picked one here, which is personalized email recommendations based on previous website content consumption, a very specific thing to do. And this gets back to what's listed here as the storyboard is kind of what we were earlier, we're calling the solution. So it's the set of steps that's going to build out into the use case. So we want to select the best offer. It's a marketing use case. The impact obviously is going to be better response, more revenue, reduced marketing costs. Some pretty straightforward thing. But then we have the storyboards. What are the steps in this thing? Brad's going to visit a website. The system's going to capture that data. It's then going to identify product offers. It's very complex analytics here that are hidden behind that very simple statement. Now we're going to add Brad to an email promotion list, again, with those personalized offers that are targeted just for him based on what he's done. And then Brad, of course, is going to respond to the offers, and we're all going to get very rich very quickly. So, this is just one of many, many things you can do with personalization that the CDP is going to make possible. So again, it's a CDP use case because we're moving data between the systems. So let me just stop there and go on to the next.
All right, thank you. So just for our audience, before we take your live questions, and please keep those coming, let's talk about one more use cases, which is better attribution and measurement across all channels. Robin?
Oh man, this one. So I think attribution as itself is pretty well defined. I think most people understand that when you're talking about attribution or attribution modeling, you're trying to understand the comprehensive and an accurate bigger picture of the entire consumer's journey, and you're trying to figure out how much weight to allocate to each step along the way. So easier said than done, especially given a few headwinds that we're facing today. So you thought you were going to get out of this webinar without talking about the loss of third-party cookies, but too bad, we're going to hit it anyway. So a couple headwinds here for attribution. You have the deprecation of third-party cookies, so it's becoming more challenging to track a user between campaign interactions and their purchase on the website. You also have walled gardens and vendors where in order to get the level of user information required, campaign interactions, recorded conversions, clicks, views, etc., some of the criteria to have that or get that as a partner can be pretty complicated. So you're in a position where getting to accurate attribution can feel sometimes like a moving target, where it used to be a little bit more linear. So all that to say, first-party data, as we know, is becoming more and more critical because of a lot of those reasons and others. But what's nice about a CDP, and a CDP is not by any means a silver bullet to get you to everything you've ever needed in attribution, but it's a great step along the way, especially from the aspect of what you really need to have this comprehensive picture is a 40,000-foot view of the consumer journey, and also super, from the ground up view of every single piece of step of the way across every single channel you have. So the CDP is great because that's the place where you start aggregating an accurate source of truth for all of that data, which you will then use to implement your attribution. So a CDP, and sometimes as we've implemented with clients, we've found that a CDP can even act kind of like a mirror to show them where they need to clean up their data. And data governance, data capture, data governance is absolutely critical. And getting the right clean data and the right governance around your data is absolutely critical to get attribution right. Another bonus of CDP is that it's a tool that kind of arms you with the ability to clean and transform data in one place, which is really nice. And CDPs can also come armed with some AI and modeling capabilities as well. So there's a lot you can do there. What else? So I think first and foremost, very strict data discipline is key when you're talking about attribution. So that's pretty critical, especially for incoming sources, ingesting sources. Also, something that's maybe not talked about so much is the cross-team governance and the system-wide requirements and governance in place to also make sure you're having accurate attribution, because it's not just the CDP, right? It's every piece of every system along every step of the way. And I think honestly, that's probably the hardest part, is aligning all of those pieces to do what you need it to do. So can't say it enough, data quality, data governance, and automation are key to attribution. And then once you have that, you're able to really have an accurate value of each step, and also how much you got for how much you spent at each step. And you can determine from a business case standpoint whether that's in your target spend and return. So is it worth it? And also incrementally, if I spend so much more on this channel, what can I expect back? So you can really start getting it down to a science in terms of forecasting your media spend down the line. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to David to bring us home.
Thanks. And yeah, just wanted to add one thing on attribution. It's one of my favorite topics, especially for a CDP. And part of the reason why is everything else that we talked about around personalization, around first party data, around first party targeting, triggers, et cetera. It really is dependent upon how you can measure success and performance. And one of the great benefits of CDP, and probably some of the discovery questions you should ask up front, are: can you actually collect media exposure data within the CDP? Can you attach that to a customer profile so that you can map out the entire prospect and customer journey? And then another key part of this is that it can be very transformational to how you look at your marketing program. So being able to transition, for example, from media mix modeling, which is very probabilistic, and can have a lot of potential kind of issues or concerns with that, to a more deterministic approach that Robin said is really rooted in first party data, can really change how you look at all your investments, all your use cases, because it gives you a totally different lens. So when we're thinking about, I mentioned before, around future proofing, it's important to start asking those type of questions to see if you can start collecting that data, if you can attach that to the individual profiles and map out that journey so that you can answer these more complex attribution questions that can arise because of all these new use cases that now CDP can enable.
Well, thank you so much to all three of you for sharing all of that great information on those use cases. And I really enjoyed the storyboard. So thanks for incorporating those into the slides. It was really helpful. So great news. Our audience has been engaging with us a ton. So thank you to our audience. We have a lot of great questions. So let's get right to those. Robin, the first question I'm going to hand over to you. What's the best use case for using a CDP at a marketing agency?
Oh man, I love a CDP for cross-channel personalization. I think that is a great use case, and being able to onboard in-store data as well to inform that. I think that is a really, really powerful way that you can engage with your customers. And if you're not doing that, I think your competitors are. So you should absolutely be doing this.
All right, thank you. Robin, also, how do you prioritize use cases when value can be subjective?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question and can be super pretentious or contentious. So I kind of start with a North Star and a vision that everyone agrees on is what we're trying to achieve as my, like, if I'm facilitating a room, for example, as my referee. And then we back into, I think David Schey mentioned it earlier, but you always talk about level of effort, level of impact, and price. But then I think something else you need to consider is return over time. So something we talk about with clients is expectations on what they can expect when. So you take something really complicated, like probabilistic or MMM, the return on that can be really, really high, but it might take longer to achieve it. So making sure you have the right mix of use cases to demonstrate true value in the short term and also the long term, I think is really, really critical.
Well, you talk about value, and often value can be determined by there being an initial problem. So Robin, what are your thoughts on some ideas on how folks can come up with a problem list?
Oh my goodness. Also great question. Thanks for throwing them all over to me. Problem list. I would start with a short list of things that you could do if you could take XYZ off your plate. So maybe it takes you 3 days to aggregate all of these sources into a customer waterfall report, or maybe it takes you, whatever it is, time to transform data in your current processes. So start with each of your stakeholders, identify what functions are included in this implementation, and start with a short list and go back to that art of the possible. What are the things that I could do and I would like to do that would make my life as a marketer that much more powerful or that much better? And that's where I would start.
Okay, those are great points. Thank you, Robin. I'm going to give you a break right now. The next question, the next question is for David Schey. Could you give an example of a CDP use case that fits in the umbrella of AI?
Absolutely. And another great question. So yeah, I think there are various things that AI can leverage or AI capabilities that can be powered by a CDP. So getting back to some of the use cases we talked about before, let's say, for example, personalization. So AI can help drive some of those personalization levers, leveraging the data within the CDP. So things like who is price sensitive or not, identifying does someone need along those lines, does someone need an offer or promotion to be able to respond versus will they respond at full price? Purchase channel preference, so we're actually driving people to in-store versus online. Also predictive analytics such as time to repurchase or likelihood to churn or predicted lifetime value. So all of those can really be enabled and powered by AI incorporated within the CDP.
All right, great. Thank you so much. AI is obviously very popular, so thanks to our viewer for bringing that into the mix here. David Raab, in the beginning during your portion, you talked a lot about different roles within an organization, when thinking about use cases and focus groups. What critical roles are needed to ensure the CDP is maximized within the marketing organization?
Okay, well, yeah, there are a number of roles even within the marketing organization nowadays. Organizations are more complicated. Obviously, we have the business users, the people who run the channels is really what we're talking about, your web people, your email people, your advertising people, who are going to be the primary users. But we also typically have a MarTech staff nowadays in a marketing department of any size, who are going to be more engaged in understanding what the requirements are throughout the marketing group, so they can help solutions that serve more than one little subset within marketing. Often the MarTech people are also doing some of the data analysis. We have data teams who are not really within marketing, but are more of a separate group, who are more responsible for managing data throughout the organization. They're going to be heavily involved. We have our IT team who controls the access to the systems and plays a very important role in both the selection of vendor, looking at things like security, which they're typically involved with, and obviously enabling access to the systems that are going to feed data into the CDP, whether those are source systems or a data lake or a data warehouse. Those are all things that are going to feed into the CDP. We have compliance people and governance people. There's just a lot of folks to keep involved in this, and they all play an important role, and they all need to be kept on board as we go through the process. So we don't come to the end and say, oh, guess what? You can't buy the system. It doesn't meet our security requirements. You just wasted months of effort picking something because you didn't consider that. So there's a lot of groups actually that you do need to get. Within marketing is marketing. And then we have customer service people, we have sales people, we have operations teams, again, outside of marketing, but still certainly potential users and consumers of CDP outputs. So we also have to have those guys involved.
Well, great point. So thank you for that. It does seem like it spans well beyond marketing. David Schey, which CDP tools would you recommend?
Great. So I think there are lots of different considerations that will tie back to the different use cases. So obviously at Zeta, we have our own kind of platform and CDP. And what we really focus on, or the use cases we really shine on, for example, are being able to leverage those third-party data signals that we mentioned before and use that in personalization. Getting back to also around identity resolution and the ability to interject some of those different use cases as well. Again, tying back to where your priorities are also. And then I also think another consideration, getting back to, you mentioned before, around AI capabilities, right? And as you're laying out those different use cases, make sure that you select a tool that has those that are really built in. The other piece that I would make sure they layer on is that does the CDP and how does it connect to other systems and other platforms? Because at the end of the day, usually you're not using one tool, one vendor for every single kind of component and every capability. So to make sure that can kind of plug in and wrap around your full stack so that you can get the most out of your CDP investment.
All right, thank you for that. Robin, I'm going to bring you back into the mix here. Is omni-channel orchestration really viable in a cookieless world?
I think it is. If you have a good first-party data set, you know a lot about your customers, and you're using AI in some places to kind of help fill the gaps with a high degree of certainty, I think you truly can achieve that. Okay. It makes it more challenging, of course, but I think you have to still take what you have. And right now we have a lot of tools at our fingertips, and we can do it.
Okay, thank you for that perspective. Next question for David Raab. How do you prefer to handle multi-channel applications of each use case while road mapping? This viewer says, for example, in the real-time trigger, do you tier out which channels can be activated first versus later in the roadmap, or is there another step of the process? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're right. You don't want to do everything at once, boiling the ocean. You looked at the use cases that require which channels. Part of your use case sequencing actually is looking at which channels are involved, so I can cluster the use cases that use the same channels and do them kind of first or second or third, but at the same time. Then I'll add a new channel, and that opens up the potential for a bunch of new use cases that support that channel. That's the most efficient way to do that. The other consideration is just looking at channel outputs. Well, what do I have connectors for? Okay, so which ones is it easy to connect to? Which ones is it hard to connect to? And again, you want to go with the easy ones. So it's all about understanding the full scope of all the use cases, understanding the requirements for each of those use cases, and then clustering them together in a way that you're only adding a few new capabilities at a time as you incrementally deploy your CDP, if that helps to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have time for one more question. David Schey, we're going to round it out with you. Is a CDP a good option for a B2B marketing agency who has a small client audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, B2B is coming up a lot more often with a CDP. I think at a high level, it's a lot of the same B2C use cases. It's just usually to a smaller audience with a greater deal of precision that you have. But the ability to have a CDP at its core is really about being able to collect customer information. In this case, it would just be business users, and then being able to decision off of that in an omni-channel orchestrated manner. So it still has the same kind of capabilities and functionality. It just becomes maybe more critical to, for example, have new data sources that have B2B characteristics within those so you can personalize. It becomes important to maybe to be able to syndicate out to new end channels, such as LinkedIn and other B2B specific channels that you can then orchestrate within. And then measurement also becomes, when we're talking about attribution, becomes more important, because the way you measure performance is typically not going to be of immediate revenue. It may be generating a sales lead, et cetera. And then same thing on the AI capabilities, where maybe you're looking for more AI-driven lead scoring capabilities in real time, and how you can use that to drive personalization.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that about B2B. And thank you so much to our audience for the great engagement. Those were some awesome questions that you asked. Thank you for being very proactive in that with us. And of course, a big thank you to David, Robin, and David for all of this great content. And of course, for answering those questions that came in from the audience today. We really appreciate you being here. So before we wrap up, let me just take a moment to tell you about what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for live analyst and tech talk webinars on our events page at emarketer.com/events. On the audio side of the house, don't forget to tune into Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast. And finally, check out our various newsletters. Thank you all for your time. And thanks again to David, Robin, and David, the team at Zeta Global, and our eMarketer studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.